There is a man in this story who killed over 300 people with his bare hands. He wasn't a murderer. He was a government official, and when the job was done, he walked home through the same streets as everyone else. The same market, the same square. Nobody looked at him. Nobody spoke to him. Nobody sat near him. But there's something in this story that historians still can't fully explain. Something this man did before every single execution, a private, almost obsessive ritual that once you hear it, you won't be able to stop thinking about what it means. We'll get there. 3 in the morning. The city smells of wet wood, horsesons, and cook fires that died out hours ago. The cobblestone streets are empty, not a soul in sight. Just a single figure, moving slowly toward the central square, a leather bag tucked under one arm, hood pulled up against the cold. He doesn't hurry. He's done this hundreds of times. His name might be Franz, or Heinrich, or Dieter. The name changes depending on the city, the century, but the figure is always the same. A man alone, before dawn, making his way to the scaffold while the rest of the world still sleeps. There's a public execution at noon today. He's been awake since midnight. The first thing he does when he reaches the scaffold is not what you'd expect. He doesn't sharpen the axe. He doesn't check the rope. The first thing he does is clean. With cold water and rough rags, with an almost obsessive precision, he scrubs every plank of the wooden platform. He removes what's left from the last execution, dark stains that no one else has touched, because no one else comes near this place willingly. He works alone, in silence, a torch driven into the ground throwing his long shadow across the wet boards. This isn't about hygiene, it's something else entirely. Historical records from cities like Nuremberg, Frankfurt, and Augsburg document that medieval executioners were meticulous about their tools to an unusual degree. They sharpened their blades the night before, wrapped them in clean cloth, cared for them with an attention that stood in brutal contrast to how those tools were used. Why? Because a dull axe meant unnecessary suffering. 2 strikes instead of 1. 3. And he knew it. He lived with it. He was the one who had to finish the job while looking the condemned man in the eye. That kind of psychological weight had no equivalent in medieval life. While the city slept, he carried it alone, in the dark, preparing a death that would be public spectacle by noon. But tonight was simply his responsibility. He finishes cleaning, checks the rope, runs his fingers along the blade one more time. Satisfied, he sits at the edge of the platform, legs hanging over the side, and waits for the sun to come up. If this world already has you, what comes next is worse. Stay with it. He was probably born into this. In medieval Europe, the executioner's trade was hereditary across most regions. The executioner's son became the executioner, not always because the law demanded it, but because no one else wanted the position, and because no one would marry an executioner's daughter, do business with his family, or let their children play with his. The stain was total. It passed through blood. There was a concept in medieval Germany that captures it perfectly. Unehrlichkeit, dishonor, a social category that included executioners, knackers, latrine cleaners, people the city couldn't function without, people the city pretended didn't exist. In some cities, the executioner was forbidden from living inside the walls at all. His house sat outside, near the cemetery or as a slaughterhouse. In others, he could live inside, but invisible rules governed every interaction. He couldn't sit in certain pews at church. He couldn't touch produce at the market before paying for it. He wasn't welcome in certain taverns, and yet the city paid him a steady salary. In 15th century Nuremberg, the executioner earned less than a master craftsman, but more than a common laborer. He received additional payments for each execution, for each application of torture during interrogations, for each brand he burned into the skin of lesser offenders. The state needed him. Society rejected him. He lived in exactly that gap. The sun has barely risen when the city starts to stir, and something strange happens in the streets. People move toward the square, not running, not shouting, with a calm that is somehow more unsettling than panic. Families with children, merchants who've already opened their stalls and glance toward the scaffold between customers. Old men who've claimed the best spots near the platform since first light. Public executions in medieval Europe weren't simply punishment. They were theater of the state, the moment when power made itself visible, physical, undeniable. And the executioner was the lead performer. Nobody understood that better than he did. Around 9 in the morning, he returns home, washes his hands again, changes into specific clothes, clean, set aside only for days like this. In some regional traditions, the executioner wore red. In others, black. The color varied. The purpose didn't. The clothing set him apart visually, made him a recognizable figure, a symbol. He eats something. Not much. Almost always alone. And this is where it happens. The thing I promised you at the start. This is where the routine becomes something no history book quite knows how to explain. If this world has you locked in, there are more stories like this one waiting for you. Subscribe. Don't leave yet. Historical records from German, French, and Swiss cities document something unusual about the most well-known medieval executioners. Before each execution, many of them visited the condemned in their cell. Not to confirm logistics, not as part of any official protocol, to talk. Franz Schmidt, the executioner of Nuremberg, who carried out more than 300 executions between 1573 and 1617, and who left behind an extraordinary personal diary, describes these visits with a precision that is difficult to sit with. He would arrive at the cell hours before the execution. Sit down. Ask the condemned whether they wanted to make confession, whether they wanted something to eat, whether there was anyone they wanted a final message delivered to after their death. This wasn't performed compassion. It was something more uncomfortable than that. Schmidt recorded in his diary the name of every person he executed, their crime, their last words, their age, as though he needed to remind himself they were human, as though the greatest danger of his work wasn't the axe or the blood, but the moment he stopped caring. That's the detail historians don't quite know how to categorize. A man whose job was to kill, who protected himself from dehumanization by speaking to his victims before he killed them. What kind of psychology does that produce? What kind of life leads a person there? By noon, the square is full. The condemned arrives under guard. The crowd watches. Some shout, some pray. Some simply stare with that hollow expression people get when they're witnessing something they know they shouldn't have normalized, but have. The executioner steps up onto the scaffold. And here is something that always catches first-time students of this history off guard. The crowd doesn't exactly boo him. There's a particular tension in the air. Not hatred, but something more complicated. It's the tension of watching someone do what you need done, but would never do yourself. It's the weight of shared guilt that nobody acknowledges out loud. The work takes minutes. And when it's over, when the crowd begins to scatter, when the street vendors drift back to their stalls, when children run through the legs of their parents toward home, the executioner is alone on the scaffold again. He cleans. Again, the same rags, the same cold water, the same unhurried precision. Then he collects his leather bag, wraps his tools, and walks home through streets that are now packed with people. Nobody looks at him. Nobody speaks. A child running toward his mother nearly collides with him, and the mother grabs the boy by the arm. Instinctively, hard, pulls him aside, says nothing, doesn't look up. He keeps walking. Franz Schmidt retired in 1617 after more than 40 years of service. He spent the final years of his life petitioning the city of Nuremberg to officially grant him the status of an honorable man, ehrlich. For himself and his family, he succeeded, one of the very few executioners in documented European history to escape that category of dishonor while still alive. He died in 1634. His diary survived. In one of the last entries, written years after his retirement, he writes about a man he executed decades earlier. He remembers his name, his age, what the man said to him in the cell that morning. There's no remorse in the words, no justification, just the cold, human record that it happened, that he was there, that this man existed. That is what historians struggle to explain, not the axe, not the blood, not the social exile, but the fact that the most feared man in the city, the man nobody wanted to know, was quite possibly the only one who remembered everyone's name. This world doesn't end here. There are more stories that have never been told. If this one got to you, you already know what to do.